Hey, well, a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you tuning in from around the world for the Water Cities of the Future online discussion. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water, and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes where we'll be taking you on a journey. We'll be looking at the past, where cities have perhaps got it wrong when it comes to water. We'll be looking at the present, sharing examples of some of the cities around the world who are getting it right, but we'll also be looking into the future. We'll almost be playing a game of SimCity, not quite literally, but asking our esteemed speakers to become mayor for the day and to outline their visions for how cities of the future would look, function, and incorporate water. So we're now just going to run a couple of audience poll questions just to find out a bit more about you, which organization you work in, where you're located, the sector that you work in, as well as the city, municipality, and population size. But whilst you are filling that in, the question comes up of why cities? Well, by 2050, 7 out of 10, 70% of people are expected to live in cities. And as they continue to grow, so does the exposure to climate and disaster risk. Rapid urbanization is perhaps inevitable, and so this will bring with it infrastructure challenges, particularly on water. But actually, I was thinking about this introduction this morning, and if you think about it, water has, since really the beginning of humanity, and it's been critical to establishing communities, whether it's villages and small communities first being formed near water sources, eventually evolving into towns and then cities. But really, what's happened with our relationship with water? By 2050, more than 7.4 million people living in C40 cities will be at areas of risk of flooding, which could cause up to 136 billion loss in GDP. But as we get connected and we're building more megacities around the world, we're now wrestling with the extremes of water, whether it's too little or too much. And there's an urgent need to build and rebuild cities to be resilient and to harness instead of wrestling with that water, which will require many different things, from accelerated policy through to increased collaboration and investment. But today, it's the first of a three-part series on cities of the future, and we want to explore how we can turn water from being seen as a risk to an opportunity, from potential scarcity to abundance. A big thanks to our session sponsor, Bentley Systems, and also a reminder to check out the resources tab. There's some incredible documents and information on water in the cities from our sponsor and partnering organizations as well. So let's quickly see the results from the audience poll. If we can throw those up, please, Anne. There we go. So the first one, in which organization do you work? So a third, 30% is in local government. A big number also in industry, federal and state government, academia as well. In terms of where are you located, nearly half of you are from the United States, Canada, 21% are from Europe, Africa, and a small percentage from Africa as well. In terms of where do you work, a chunk are in public works, utilities, engineering and construction, and a small number of you, just one, in city planning. So hopefully that will be a few more of you as you join. So that's a bit of information on the audience demographics. So before we welcome our esteemed panel onto the stage, I'd like to hand over to a man who certainly needs no introduction. Mr. Will Sarni is the founder and CEO of Foundry, to say a few words, and we have both promised no slides. Will, over to you.
What do you mean no slides, Tom? You got to be kidding me.
You didn't get the memo on that one? Okay.
No. But anyway, so first of all, thanks everyone for participating in this conversation. It will be a conversation, no slides. A personal note on all of this, I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. I grew up in New York. I love cities, and I hope that during the conversation, as much as we'll be talking about governance and infrastructure and technology innovation, we keep in mind that cities are about people, and this is about improving the quality of life for people that live in urban environments. So I want to repeat a little bit about the statistics in terms of where we're at. It's important to keep in mind that the global population shifted from rural to urban in 2007, so it's been quite a while. Roughly now, about 55% of the global population lives in an urban setting. That's projected to increase to 68% by 2050. It has a number of implications, and it's very different whether you're in the global north or global south, and where in the world you are, specifically which region. So roughly around 793 million people moved to an urban setting between 2015 and projected to 2025. About 745 million will it be an increase in the global south. So again, there's a big difference between what's happening in the north versus the south, and it's really got very significant implications in terms of technology, infrastructure, governance, capacity to pay, and so on. The number of megacities, these are cities over 10 million people, is projected to increase from 33 in 2018 to 43 by 2030. And 35 of those megacities will be in the global south, again, to really emphasize the difference between the north and the south. The fastest growing cities will be in Africa. Delhi is expected to be 47 million people by 2050. That is astonishing, with very significant implications. So what are the challenges that cities face? Tom touched on this a little bit. Obviously, water scarcity. I'm in Denver, and that is becoming more than acute for the American West. Water pollution, it's not just a quantity issue, but it's a quality issue with increases in population and the ability for pollutants to enter both surface water and groundwater. Aging infrastructure, infrastructure was not built for this. So how do you upgrade existing infrastructure and also plan better going forward? We're going to talk about stormwater management, obviously a critical issue. Stormwater has gone from being considered a waste to being an asset. So how do we ensure that we manage stormwater in a positive way and consider alternative uses? Groundwater depletion, I think this is something that is typically not really talked about, but if you're in a coastal city, that's really critical. Subsidence, sea level rise due to the impacts of over-extraction, but also climate change. Climate change overall, I think cities were broken from a water perspective long before we figured out anything about climate change. Climate change just makes it more problematic. It's a threat multiplier in the scheme of things. It's a loss of stationarity, which maybe we'll talk about. One other thing that's really important to me is that we don't think about water and cities in a silo. I like to think about cities and watersheds, but also the food shed. Where does food come from to benefit cities, obviously? And then also the power shed. Where does energy come from? So as we have our conversation, let's think about energy, water, and food, nexus issues, and how do we manage that? And then governance and management capacity to change. I think that's absolutely a critical issue. And also tied to that is, how do we ensure that we have the appropriate funding and financing and be creative about that going forward, because there's really much to do with respect to upgrading infrastructure and bringing it into the 21st century. So with that, really excited about the conversation. And Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Will. As always, an excellent introduction and context, and great points about the division between the global north and south. So why don't we bring on our esteemed panelists now to kickstart the conversation. So we'd like to welcome to the virtual stage Richard Vestner, who is the Vice President of Urban Digital Twin Solutions for Bentley Systems. Welcome, Richard. Newsha Ajami, who is the Commissioner for San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and Chief Strategic Development Officer for Research for Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Newsha, good to see you again. And last, but definitely no means least, Mr. Mark Fletcher, the Director and Global Water Business Leader for Arup. Mark, welcome. So we want to we're going to split this into three parts, if you like. Part one is going to be looking at everything that's not broken, because we're optimists. We don't want to start too pessimistically, but we need some context and perhaps a sobering reality check on where we are and how we've got there. Part two, I'm going to ask you all to be mayor for the day. Sort of, if you had a vision for how the city of the future looks like, how would that look and feel, and how would it function? And then we're going to come on to some case studies for cities you've been working in or with for who's doing it right. So Newsha, let's kickstart with you. Yeah, what's broken when it comes to water, and how do we get there?
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I think broken part, I would just say maybe we don't even put it in the context of broken. We build these cities and communities in a different time for a different need, based on a different set of criteria that was available to us at the time. And that was, we had very limited capacity. I mean, we couldn't really do a lot of distributed work. So we basically brought a lot of water and resources to people in a linear way. People used it once. So if whatever comes to your home, it's one quality, but you can use it for every purpose. Then we use it once, and then it leaves your home, goes to the wastewater treatment plant, treated, put back in the environment. Depending on where we are in the world, parts of this system can be very different, but the reality is this linear system we have built was very successful. It has actually created a lot of opportunity for communities to survive and thrive. They're not dealing with, health issues, and it provided capacity for people to focus on economic growth rather than just constantly dealing with other issues. And that linear system has definitely gone throughout its life, design lifetime. And now it's almost at the end of its lifetime. And I think the opportunity is to think about, okay, what is next? Do we need to replicate the same thing, or do we need to rethink and reimagine how we do things? And just one last thing I would also say is, based on that linear system, we also build a governance structure and a financial model that would enable that kind of linear system. So we put water supply in one bucket. I think Will touched on it. We have sort of another group that deals with stormwater and flooding, and another group that deals with wastewater. And these people have their own governance structure, their own financial tools and everything. And they don't often talk to each other. So it's kind of like one linear system in three different pieces. Each one of them are just doing their own thing.
Thank you, Newsha. Yeah, it's nice to echo Will's comments there on the silo approach. I'm sure we'll come on more onto that. But I think in terms of the linear approach, that's very much because cities have evolved, have been built, as you mentioned, with economic activity in mind, and almost wastewater treatment has kind of been out of sight, out of mind, keep it away from the city, right? So this is centralized treatment because it's, who would, in the early development stages, actually want a wastewater treatment plant integrated into the city. So it's been developed, but as you mentioned, you have to then retrofit these services to get them to people who are then based in the urban area. Well, thank you, Newsha, for that. Mark, let's come on to you, because I know the topic of governance is something you speak quite strongly on. So yeah, talk a bit then about the kind of where you see things in terms of water as part of urban development, and where we are now from the legacy and how we've kind of got there.
So I think we've got to recognise that water's a system. It's a water cycle that we learn at school. And you can think about, in the way that Newsha's described, you can think about roles and responsibilities across this system that historically has been quite predictable. There's been quite good certainty learning from previous events or previous experience of how water's fluctuated in shocks and stresses. When that system now has deep uncertainty associated with it, more extreme events, it means that maybe that system that was connected, but we separated into silos in the way in which we managed it or governed it, maybe we've got to start thinking about joining up that understanding, revisiting the roles and responsibilities, and thinking how we can all work together across that cycle so it's more connected and interconnected as we think about the dependence and interdependence of our water system with other systems. And I think the reason we do that is it means that we can get much greater resilience from people working together and communicating across the cycle as we get these extremes than if we're in silos. And I think that's the fundamental starting point before we commit any investment to infrastructure or anything else. Look at how we can make the most of managing the cycle that we've got. And that includes giving early warnings or having better information about how we can share understanding on that uncertainty.
Very good. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we were talking before the webinar started on some of the messaging coming out from London, the Global Water Summit. And I think Christopher started by saying that the impact of climate change on water is leading to water cycle change. And you're seeing that from more water in the atmosphere, more heavier. And I loved, did you call it extreme situations?
Yes.
So it's a double extreme now that cities are facing. I like that. Okay, Richard. So as our sort of digital guru on the panel and a digital twin expert, how do you see things through the kind of digital lens, and how we're way more evolved now in terms of the systems, the application of AI and digital solutions, but we're still in a bit of a fragmented mess, you could say.
Right. Yeah. But Tom, well, thanks for having me here. I truly believe that digitalization is no longer an option if we want to fight climate change and related water problems, right? And that conviction truly comes from the magnitude of the challenge with infrastructure. I mean, just to bring another figure here, according to World Economic Forum, 1.5 million people are expected to move from the countryside to urban agglomerations in the next 26 years per week. 1.5 million per week, right? And these people will need homes, affordable homes, energy, roads, and water, of course. So we know that there is a water, energy, food nexus. So everything is interdependent and related, right? And today our infrastructure, as Will said at the beginning, is already outdated. So there's a huge backlog. And imagine 75% of that urban infrastructure required till 2050 still has to be built, right? Which includes water networks and treatment facilities and so on. So further to this, 75% of greenhouse gas emissions stems from infrastructure. And, by the other side, the International Federation of Independent Engineers and EY have calculated that there is a gap of 64 trillion US dollar to invest it in sustainable infrastructure to achieve net zero by 2050. So obviously, we have a lot to do, but conversely, the construction industry as a whole has its own issues with an aging workforce and fewer people. Probably Newsha can tell us more about this, but I know it also, few people want to work in this business. Owner-operators like cities or water utilities and their supply chain like engineering firms and contractors simply have to do more with less. And you see all of these challenges are condensing and multiplying in regions and in cities, and where the density of people and dependency on infrastructure to supply and connect and protect is high, and the risk of infrastructure to fail peaks. So to make better decisions in that situation, sustainable decisions, right? A city administration has to see the big picture and has to have a comprehensive overview what considers the impact of all urban verticals. As I said, everything is related in the sense of a system of systems, right? And that can include an aggregation of many domain-specific views. And of course, water is an important one, but still this departmentalized thinking and acting is still dominant. So if we talk about the past and lessons learned, right, responsibilities are restricted, or should I say, the division of labor and specialization has gone too far. The motivation of an urban planner was not pronounced to think water when the opportunity was big to shape a landmark architecture, right? And of course, there have always been exemptions from that rule. At best, water was dealt with in that bubble within the water domain. So, and by the way, this can happen in any kind of organization, right? Public and private, where there's no incentive to think outside of your box, to think systematically. And when talking about the past, don't forget, now we're coming more to that topic of digitization. It's really difficult. It was difficult really to share data and connect data and compare scenarios to develop the best option, right? If you use paper and printouts in the past, you know, the means to visualize and analyze in context were premature. But, you know, humans understand option and consequences much better if we are able to visualize things. And that's why I always say the first advantage you get from digitalization is visualization, right? We today create immersive virtual realities. You look through glasses and on a street and see buried subsurface utilities, right? Or you verify a flood protection measure against a flood simulation in context of a concrete location of city. And that was not possible, say, 10 years ago, right? And that's why, to a segue into our discussion of the future, when I was studying civil engineering, we were told the sketch, the drawing is your means to express yourself. In simple terms, this is how cities were developed by architects, engineers, and urban planners. Now, I think that drawing is now being replaced by the digital twin. The engineer uses the digital twin to learn from the past, design the present, and test against the future, right? It's like a round table to which he invites all stakeholders to participate in a process which can cover many urban aspects, including water. And then you have urban water innovation.
Very good. Thank you, Richard. Well, I think it's interesting how you linked the kind of the transparency and the information of what data can give you and how you can use that to involve more stakeholders to get that more integrated approach and move from multiple systems working next to each other, but actually the systems approach. So thank you. Will, let's go to you following the opening, and a water strategy has to be paramount to make sure things are integrated and working with the long term in mind, right? So can you give us a bit of insight from your side, and later on we'll come on to examples within the Colorado River Basin of who is getting it right. But yeah, where have things gone wrong for you?
Oh, you sound so negative, Tom.
No, I raised my voice at the end to try and optimistic, but you know, sobering question.
You know, so I want to go back to Newsha's comment about, let's not use the word broken or gone wrong. This is really a discussion of what's out of date and how do we bring things into the 21st century. So I really like the way the conversation has been framed, that, you know, we had a series of assumptions about a city and infrastructure and what we could deliver to humanity in a city. And it's just no longer timely. And, you know, I always joke that, you know, the Romans would recognize water infrastructure because we extract it, we transport it, deliver it, and then discharge it. We throw it away. Not a whole lot's changed. Mm-hmm. So that loss of stationarity, you know, a linear way of thinking about it, you know, the past is not a guide to the future. It's not even relevant for now, considering what's going on. So I think a lot of things, we have a lot of opportunities in the world of water, and Newsha, Mark, and Richard really emphasized this. And, you know, a few things I would add to the conversation. One is that there's been this perception of abundance with respect to water. And we can achieve true abundance, but you do that through better governance, funding and financing, technology. You know, Richard talked about how do you create a culture of being inclusive with respect to all the issues. And I mentioned energy, water, and food, but, you know, add equity to that, and mobility and housing issues and supply chain. You know, it's complicated. It's a wicked problem. I had to throw that in at some point, Tom. So it's really essentially what has to change to create healthier, thriving, equitable cities in a world that is really rapidly changing. And Richard's statistic in terms of the number of people moving into the urban environment on a weekly basis is mind-blowing. And one more thing I'll add about digital. I agree with Richard, digital is no longer optional in both the public and private sector. It really is an enabling technology for hard infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And also, I want to keep bringing it back to the humanity conversation. The ability to communicate to people that live in cities the issues that that city is facing, and a path forward is absolutely critical. So how do you get people to care about water policy in a city? You be transparent and have, you know, a two-way conversation. I mean, for the first time, utilities are beginning to speak to consumers. I wouldn't, you know, that's sort of unfair, but I would say an encouraging part of this change is that utilities are much more open and progressive in terms of engaging with consumers and customers on what are the issues that we're facing with respect to water. You know, three of my colleagues here know that better than anyone. So anyway, those are just some thoughts.
Great, thanks, Will. So the element of communicating openly and transparently with, I'm not a fan of the word consumers, but to people, right?
Water
Just
users.
to sort of
Water
take you up
users.
on that one, Will. But yeah, so we're going to before we move on to the next section, let's throw up a word cloud, because I think everyone's heard from our amazing panel on perhaps, and I won't use the word broken because I'll get told off for it again, but how things have been and how we can. I was just playing the devil's advocate with that word, but yeah, the team here are going to go away and create a word cloud, but we want to get input from everyone tuning in remotely. So yeah, if you could fix one thing for water cities of the future, what would it be? We do need a short answer, so 50 characters or less. So if you could fix one thing for water cities of the future, what would it be? And very shortly, we're going to come on to some questions as well. So make sure you use the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll throw these to the speakers. So final time for the word cloud. If you could fix one thing for water cities of the future, what would it be? So hopefully we've got some answers from you tuning in from home. So in terms of questions, we've got a question that's come up. If everyone can see this one. So rural to urban migration trends are in many ways exacerbating the historic underinvestment in water infrastructure. The distinction was made earlier between the expansion of municipal cities in the global south and north. So that goes back to your point, Will. And here's the question. I wonder if the panel could also comment on the importance of investing in grey versus green infrastructure, in particular, given the growth of megacities, the critical need to protect, rehabilitate vital wetlands which underpin ecosystem services and are at acute risk from urban sprawl. Amazing question. Thank you, Mark Eisinger. So yeah, maybe from one Mark to another Mark. Do you want to take a stab at that one,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
No, yeah, and it's a really good question. I think of water not just being a system, it's a natural system. And I can't help feeling that the more that we work in tune with nature, if the ground was permeable, but we put impermeable surfaces, we've changed nature. We've looked in Shanghai, so that's a rapidly urbanizing city, looking at how you can introduce or soak up water within the city, within, if you like, some natural interventions, which reduce the need for residual grey infrastructure. But I still think with the uncertainty we're facing, we need, particularly when we're retrofitting existing cities, we need to think about a need for residual grey infrastructure. You could call it storage pumps, tunnels. We could think about how we can store water on the surface temporarily. And we can think how we can use nature to not just absorb water, but also introduce water into the ground, reducing the need that we have to subsequently deal with that residual grey. Hope that starts us off anyway.
Very good. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I was reading an article yesterday around not just green infrastructure, so the ability to absorb, and in keeping with sponge cities, but the green blue, the ability to absorb, store, and then put that water to purpose locally where you need it. essentially.
And sometimes that might be into the underlying aquifers. It's not always just what you can store at the surface. So there's another potential dimension. Sorry to interrupt.
Interesting. No, great. So localized aquifer storage and recovery. Very good. We've got a question here from George Carew-Jones. Do you think that water pricing schemes are fit to allow the investment required in sustainable water infrastructure? So a question on water pricing. Maybe Newsha, I'm looking your way to take a stab at that one if you can answer. George, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would just maybe step back for a second and say, you know, in this process of creating water abundance and comfort and sort of creating space for people to grow socially and economically, we actually managed to disconnect people from their water source and where their water comes from and where it goes. So that disconnect actually has made people not necessarily value the watershed, what it takes to bring water to them, what it takes to take it away and clean it up, what it takes to maintain and operate these systems. This linear process has disconnected people. Often when you ask people where their water comes from, where it goes, it comes out of my tap, goes down my drain. That's the extent people know. And that is actually not a very good thing. So you can raise price on people. Yes, absolutely. At some point they would react to it, obviously. But I think going back to what Richard was saying, being able to help people understand the value of water from the sort of watershed value, where it comes from, who else depends on it, you know, all the ecosystem that we all depend on it, and we all depend on that ecosystem, and the ecosystem needs that water. And the fact that every waste that we have needs to be treated, uses energy, resources to put it back in the environment. That whole supply chain needs to be sort of visualized and help people understand what it means. And I would say creating more awareness might work even better than pricing, because it kind of gets people to kind of connect to that water supply and the watershed. And I think going back to one thing that Richard said as well is that he asked me, how's the job market in the water sector? And he's absolutely right. You know, we are having a hard time bringing young people to the sector. And I think partly it's because it's not exciting. No one knows what's going on in this black box of ours. So it's very hard to kind of excite them about, you know, there is this watershed aspect and there is this, data aspects. There's so many things that gets done on a daily basis in a water utility that can be super exciting. And one last thing I would say on that as well is we also, as Mark said, we need to integrate green infrastructure and nature-based solutions within our infrastructure system in a very intentional way. And that actually provides quantity and quality of water and also help us to kind of become more resilient. Now, we don't have the financial, but the way we do sort of budgeting in a very boring way, the digital infrastructure is not part of the line item in infrastructure side. Green and nature-based solutions are not line item in our infrastructure investment. So bringing those into the list can be much more important to achieve sustainability in the long run.
Very good. Thank you, Newsha. And I think without going too far down the rabbit hole of pricing and how water is underpriced, I think if there's a better understanding of the water cycle and the supply chain, as you mentioned, of how that water is getting to houses and taken away, then the conversation around pricing will be much easier. But that understanding comes from improved communication, as well said. So
and people are willing to pay more. Absolutely. If they don't know what they're paying for, it's very hard for them to be convinced for that as well.
Could I jump in for a minute, Tom?
Sure, please do.
Totally derail the conversation.
Please derail within reason.
Newsha brings up a really important point in terms of people don't know where water comes from. And I see that as a huge opportunity. And I agree about pricing, just that connectivity, a very visceral connectivity to water is a powerful driver. And I was thinking back that how much have cities changed with respect to greater connectivity to the river or the waterfront. That is now viewed as an asset, not some place where you put warehouses. And, you know, obviously San Francisco is a great example. We even see that in Denver. So that connectivity to water is just so critical in the scheme of things in terms of getting people to think differently.
100%. Yeah, if you look at some of the classic, rehabilitation of areas, even prior to the 2012 Olympics and what happened in parts of East London, and then actually putting a premium on those properties and the view over the Thames and increased house prices, there's multiple benefits by actually valuing that connection with water as opposed to previous, say, an industrial zone. But let's thank you for the questions, George and Mark. There's some more questions coming in. Thank you. We'll try and get around to answer them after the next section. So we now want to move on to the visions of the future, part 2. So I'm going to ask our esteemed speakers if they are city mayor for the day and had to design almost a city from the ground up with sustainable water at the heart, how would it function? What would it have that our current cities don't have? So we're going to have a bit of fun now and just actually give out a vision of how things could be redesigned from scratch almost. But Richard, let's start with you on this one if we can. Yeah, what's your vision for the cities of the future?
Okay, so I would argue with a couple of terms here that you all know, and I will describe what I mean. So the city that I would design would be a biodiversity, right? It would be a metaversity, and all of that organized in 15-minute districts. So, all know that concept of 15-minute. I mean, would have a minimum set of proximity-based services and neighborhoods that are accessible by walking and cycling and so on. So excluding, car traffic. But also that city that develops with nature, right? Just referring to that question before, not against nature. That's the biodiversity aspect that recognizes biodiversity as a value. This means parks and gardens and green roofs and green facades, but not only, right? It means land-sparing interventions, which reduce the footprint of gray infrastructure, and it means nature-based solutions like, just as you said, right? Bringing up a river, using a river or pond for cooling, right? This has a deep impact on urban sustainability. But also on human well-being, because you regulate the microclimate and create multi-use spaces in the sense of a sponge cities, right? Using a playground that can be used also as a reservoir. And of course, a perfect public transport system. So all of that would be the biodiversity. But to get there, to deliver faster and smarter, we need this also to be a metaversity, right? So we need a concerted action with all disciplines, all verticals must cooperate and align their goals and activities. And they can use an urban digital twin as a custodian of all that data, all those files, all those models that come from various applications and systems and hundreds of use cases in the city, right? And these cities traditionally have an interest in democratizing that data. So much of this will be open and created by everyone, by anyone, right? By many actors. So this alignment, this is what I'm talking about here, happens in a virtual system of systems, an interoperable urban digital twin, or if you need many connected urban digital twins, right? And I would see, I would use infrastructure intelligence, as we call it, and first build that city virtually, right? Run scenarios, even extreme ones, heavy rain falls after months of drought, for example, test the operations in the system, then optimize every step virtually, and then build the city in reality. So, we are working on this to advance the world's infrastructure for better quality of life. It's really not science fiction.
Thank you, Richard. So actually, as opposed to trying to retrofit digital solutions and data, you would crowdsource that data and have a digital twin from the start. What a luxurious position that would be. But I want you to have a think about what the name of this city would be, and I'll come back to you at the end, okay? You have to give it a name. So Mark, let's come on to you next. Please give us your vision. Richard very much was around the 15-minute district concept. What are your thoughts on this?
I'd echo what I said earlier, very much an understanding of our natural systems within which we're living, an understanding of risk, and that's natural risk associated with the uncertainty. So we develop in areas that are not at high risk, but of lower risk. with awareness of communities of what those risks might be. We could think of the way in which we've thought about sustainable development, but maybe moving towards restorative or restoring nature in terms of, you could think about streams or rivers or areas, and ultimately maybe thinking about the whole land use in the catchment in a different way, in a regenerative way, a way in which we may have contributions within the catchment that dramatically reduce the risk that then is felt within the city. So rather than managing a city at a city boundary scale, thinking about a city at a catchment scale, where the levers that you have to press are the land use across that whole catchment, that you optimize around the system of system functionality that you want to operate. So that's understanding some of the dependencies and interdependencies really right up front, but recognizing most importantly that the fundamental underlying natural system is the one that the more in tune you work with it, the less you have to fight or invest to overcome it. It's your friend.
Thanks, Mark. That's super interesting. So actually, as opposed to thinking of the city and then the outside river basin separately, it's actually designing the upstream with the downstream in mind from the very start, as opposed to thinking separately. I love it. Brilliant, good stuff. Newsha, your city of the future, if you were city mayor for the day, what would be the vision to go on and develop?
Since I'm moving to Richard's and Mark's cities, I don't need to design future cities.
You have a holiday home in both, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, there we go.
I would just say, I think a lot of great ideas have come up based on what Richard and Mark have said. I would say absolutely designing with nature in mind, thinking about 15-minute districts. But I would also add creating circular water economy within these communities. For example, I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now is our system, all these systems we talk about are not very efficient. For example, I was looking at the data the other day, 70% of our electricity that we generate is sort of wasted as in form of a heat, right? Can we harness that heat and reuse it? And that way we use less energy, we need less heat, we need to burn less, material to generate that electricity. Or a lot of the water that we use in our systems are wasted through leaks or inefficiencies in the system. Can we reduce that? I said it earlier, we treat water, we bring it to homes, all the same quality. Our shower is next to our toilet. Can we build cities that use the shower water to flush toilets? Then that water can be like, your sink water can be used outdoors. All these things can actually reduce our water and energy and food footprint in so many different ways. For example, Bill suggested we should think about water, energy, and food as an interconnectivity of these systems. 70% of our food is wasted in the process. Think about the amount of water and energy and resources that's required for that. I would say thinking about cities, we are building future cities today, right? So how can we make buildings as a unit more efficient? Use less water, use less energy, generate less carbon or emit less carbon? How can we reduce waste in every district by, repurposing, trying to sort of figure out how to minimize that footprint? And then that can go into the neighborhood, they can go in the city, sort of regional perspective, as well as sort of very, very small unit perspective of a home, and how can you make it efficient? And then I think trying to use nature-based solutions to not just actually increase water quality, but also prevent quantity degradation. We talked about like nature-based solutions in different ways, but the reality is they're also our sort of ally in preventing water quality degradation. Wetlands, multi-purpose areas, they can actually treat water for us or help us with that. And then, so I would just say another one piece I would put here is these future cities also will have, if you kind of integrate these systems at a small scale, then you have the opportunity to connect the governance structure and institutional capacity as well, because then the money can flow into creating efficiency at small scale rather than just thinking about buckets and who has money to invest in what and where. And so, and you know, we can retrofit current cities and make them better. We are building future cities today, but also communities that are like emerging markets and, you know, the developing countries, they actually have a chance to leapfrog to this future right now, rather than just sort of repeating the mistakes we had made before. So thinking about how you can actually provide these thought processes and designs and thinking into those communities and let them be the model or the shining city on the hill for the future is also quite important.
Very good. Thank you, Newsha. So it's a much more efficient city with less wastage on heat, electricity, heat, and also water wastage, where anywhere between 30 to 40% of water supply is lost on average around the world. So a much more efficient, connected city as well. We've had Will, before I jump to you to conclude this section, we had a nice comment from Laksham Shrikant, who said city equals density. Would the future city be more dense or less dense? So a very short, concise question comment, but just something to think about as we move on. But Will, how would the city of the future, or Sarniville, look in your eyes?
You gave him a name.
I've given you the name already just to help you out.
Hey, you know, I think Sarni means sandwich in the UK, so I don't know, maybe that works. But I'm glad that question was raised or presented. As I think about what a city would look like, blank sheet of paper, you know, really what we're talking about is building a city that is sustainable, resilient, and equitable, and vastly improved quality of life. So I see it as high density, a lot of open space, integration of nature-based solutions. But, you know, let's be clear. I mean, digital technologies and extreme decentralized technologies will get us, I believe, to a sustainable and resilient and equitable city in the scheme of things. So we're not going to pivot to 100% nature-based solutions. It's understanding what's approachable, achievable. It's got to be walkable. I love Richard's comment. You know, a city is just a collection of neighborhoods. I think that reflects my, you know, upbringing in New York. I want to keep going back to the nexus. Would love to see a city that is as close as possible to being self-sufficient with respect to energy, water, and food. So what does it mean in terms of reducing supply chains with respect to food? Enormous impact in a positive way. Newsha brought this up in terms of decentralized, extreme decentralized systems in the built environment, neighborhood scale systems, as opposed to only centralized. It doesn't mean centralized goes away. It just means that we have a lot more on our menu now. I would add also recreation. So think about how to connect humanity to water from a recreational perspective. And I think that goes a long way in terms of getting people to realize that this is a invaluable, precious resource that we have. So, and I can't wait to visit Sarniville, by the way, Tom.
Thank you, Will. Good points. I like the angle there about kind of food and health. I remember doing some work for green tech a couple of years ago, and one speaker was talking about the increase in food deserts. So actually, a proximity of a city that's grown so quickly, there's actually a lack of access to healthy, nutritious food because of the rapid urban sprawl. So I think putting health and nutrition as part of the heart of that city is also something that has to be factored in. So good stuff. We've got lots more questions and answers to get through by the end, but let's just take a look at the word cloud if we could, because hopefully that will be ready and get some input from all of you. So if we could share the word cloud on the screen now, that would be brilliant. And here we go. So we've got a couple of options here. So water reuse is one of the bigger ones. Water quality. That has now gone blurred for me. It's not my eyesight. I think, oh, here we go. Aged infrastructure, sustainable management, water user engagement. And there we go. That word connected again, connected watershed is coming up. Better planning, informal settlement and retention of rooftop runoff. So some of the ones that are more popular are water quality and water reuse as well. So, but I think we should also mention that water is at the very center and the heart of it as well. So yeah, we can stop sharing that now. So the final chapter then is kind of we've looked ahead to the future, to these cities, these visions, to kind of this dream, this utopia. We're quite far off in a lot of places, but in terms of who's getting it right, is in this present day, which cities are you working with, whether as partners, clients, where you think there's something where they really are getting it right? And often I think in water discussions, we tend to hear of the same city. So it's good that within this discussion, we've got a few new names for the list as well. So Newsha, yeah, who's getting it right in your eyes?
Of course, San Francisco is getting it right. I'm not going to not say that. but I would just say, obviously, you have heard the name of San Francisco is like the whole on-site reuse system, and the fact that we have an ordinance that requires all these new buildings to implement on-site reuse, which uses water and within the building multiple times. And the importance of that is not necessarily the fact that there's a technology involved, but actually the fact that it was a policy change that then led into like people implementing this solution. Now, the new city on the block is Austin. They just actually implemented the same ordinance to require on-site reuse in their new buildings. And, I think that's really exciting to see this trend is sort of picking up and more people are buying into it. I'm hoping at some point in the next 10 years, we'll move on with these big buildings being required for on-site reuse and actually go into like single family homes. And there are units you can buy, put in your shower and use it to flush your toilet. So this is not just new building kind of a thing. There are opportunities for retrofit. So yeah, I would just say at this point, I would say San Francisco and Austin, at least when we think about increasing creating a circular water economy, as they definitely have embraced some new ideas.
Great, thank you, Newsha. So the regulatory change was the catalyst for that shift in San Francisco, right? To really driving that
Yes.
decentralized water recycling of grey water in commercial buildings of a certain size. And yeah, good to see as well as Austin taking the lead. So Mark, you mentioned earlier in the conversation about China. So yeah, could you share some other examples there of kind of which particular cities are really getting it right?
I could some. And but when I respond, it's really important that we aren't thinking there's a silver bullet to solve all this. For me, there's a way of working that helps us build greater resilience to what we've got. And I thought we've worked in China, but I've been around Guangzhou and Nanjing and Shanghai and Beijing, and even we had a workshop with the university in Beijing. The concept of using nature to soak up water and reducing the scale of your problem is a very practical one, and it makes sense. But I think they've been forced by necessity as much as anything, because the uncertainty has driven a way of thinking. If I wanted to cite someone who I think is trying to lead the way in thinking, a small island state like Singapore, which has led the way where it's been dependent on a water supply and it's managed how to use less water, how to bring nature-based solutions in their active, beautiful or clean ABC water that they use. So the things I've seen in China, the things I've seen there, some of the work that's been done in Philadelphia around use of green infrastructure in New York has been quite practical in terms of taking green infrastructure to scale. But also, I think it sort of contrasts with a different need, and maybe the flood we've just seen in Nairobi highlights it, that in some of the global south, we can implement nature-based solutions or work with nature. But where we have informal settlements and we have planning, that if that was just restructured, could take away people from the hazard that's presented from being in very high risk flood areas and use nature again to soak up water. So I think context different wherever you go, but I think I'm always looking around the world to see who does what and where, understand the context and take something away from it in the way in which I try and take my thinking to a different level. And I think Newsha's just given some great examples, and I've been around to see the Purple Pipe system in San Francisco, and that was very much in many ways world leading. It just took time again to get the governance and get the behaviour right for people to then think about adoption. So I'd love to say the answer is here, but it isn't. It's a number of places, but as long as we share the knowledge, then we'll move in the right direction.
Right, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think it's important, as you mentioned, there is no one perfect system or one size fits all. It depends on very much on the context and the challenges of that particular country. So yeah, great insight. Will, in terms of an example then, perhaps within the context of the Colorado River Basin, which is one of the most over-allocated, perhaps critical water resources spanning 7 different states in America. But can you give us an example within there that you've seen something that you think is particularly innovative?
Yeah, a few things. Obviously, I will say that I think Denver does a good job and is doing a better job day by day, tied to Newsha's comment about changes in public policy. The city was designed with a very high percentage of parks, open space, and many of those parks manage stormwater, water runoff, and recharge groundwaters by design. And that's impressive in its own right. But, I'm glad you brought up the American West. I think it's pretty easy to vilify cities like, Phoenix and Las Vegas and say, well, they shouldn't be there, they should go away. Well, that's not going to happen. They will adjust, and they're doing so. And as I think about examples of how cities from a public policy and technology perspective are adapting to this new reality in the 21st century, I call out Las Vegas and Phoenix. I really do believe that Las Vegas is in fact getting it right in terms of changing regulations. And, Mark brought this up, collaboration. There is a very strong partnership between SNWA, the utility, and the private sector in Las Vegas, and an acknowledgement that water is finite and, traditional sources are declining rapidly. And you're seeing that in Phoenix in terms of groundwater recharge and, collaboration between Intel and, the Chandler utility and so on. So I'd say let's flip the narrative around. There actually are some really positive developments, and the question is, how do we scale it?
Great, thanks. Well, yeah, I think it's all too easy to vilify and demonize a city in a very dry watershed, but actually there's some great work going on behind the scenes, as you mentioned. So Richard, to kind of bring things back to Europe, we've looked over in the US and we've looked to parts of Asia. Can you share your example from your home nation of Germany as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if we talk about conditions, I agree to what I heard here. And it's also important if we're talking about a total new greenfield development, like Masdar City, for example, in UAE, right? Or in a developed world, you'll not see so many comparable greenfield developments, obviously. So here cities are trying to modernize existing infrastructure and find space to accommodate principles of a sponge city. And as an example, as you say, I'd refer to Germany's capital, Berlin, where a huge urban district development has started to create a carbon neutral city of the future. You can say that the lead investor and developer, by the way, is the corporate real estate company of Siemens, who will alone spend at least 600 million euro in the coming 10 years. So the goal is to create 1 million square meters for mixed usage in existing and new buildings on 72 hectares and operate this property CO2 neutral, right? The city admin, the city mayor, of course, he's enthused because it's a chance to have a sustainable, inclusive, and open 50-minute district, if you wish. And of course, water is an essential element, and we'll see rainwater storage on that side, as well as heat recovery from wastewater, by the way, a technology that we haven't mentioned yet. But the project needs this contribution to fulfill, these ambitious goals to be CO2 neutral. So I think Bentley is really fortunate to support this project with an urban digital twin, because many things have to be done the first time in such a dense existing, even historic urban environment. And it's a true state-of-the-art prototype for connecting the real world with the virtual world. And our technology helps to pre-simulate and significantly optimize, urban planning and operations. So there is a link in the resources where you can have a glance of how this looks like. So enjoy that.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Sounds like a hugely aspirational and ambitious project in Germany there.
Absolutely.
We are running over a little bit, so we're going to go to 5 minutes past. So thank you for those of you. I know some may have a hard stop, but we've got some amazing questions, far too many to get through. So we'll make sure they're forwarded on to all the speakers. But there was one that I particularly caught my eye that I'd love to get a quick 30-second minute answer from each of you too. And that's from an Angela Stiegler, who addressed a question that we've all kind of touched upon. And that's, when I look to the future as a young water engineer, I see a level of uncertainty that our profession has not yet dealt with since the original invention of the infrastructure systems we rely upon today. As discussed, this is a unique time to reinvent our infrastructure systems, and young folks will be the ones who carry out the vision in our designs. How are your organizations ensuring young folks are empowered to lead, to learn, to carry on the work in an uncertain and dynamic future? And that's from Angela Stiegler. And she says, thanks in advance, and also hi to Newsha. So yeah, maybe Mark, can you give us a kind of an elevator pitch just in terms of that point?
I can. The last 5 years, we've encouraged our young water professionals to develop their thinking and also empower them to have their voice. And a global leader sits on our global water executive with an equal status. They've been right at the forefront of the conversations around the climate discussions at COP. We do a pre-COP and we do a post-COP. It's open source, shared as widely as we can with the external networks. It's more about a conversation that shifts around how we manage uncertainty going forwards and how we can build greater resilience within a suite of shocks and stresses, rather than reacting to a shock like a flood or a stress like sea level rise, but thinking about a suite of those things and increasingly look at how we can move to something that we see as regenerative design, a more expansive way of thinking or rethinking the problem at scale rather than just at source. So that's what we've been doing.
Thank you, Mark. So ensuring that the young water professionals have a seat at the table and are part of the conversation. Newsha, can you, obviously you're involved from a university research side of things, but can you talk maybe from the commission side within San Francisco?
Yeah, I think I really like what Mark said. Having people at the table is extremely important. But also I would just say, trying to help the new generation of engineers and, college educated people coming up, being able to think a little bit more broader than one silo, right? How do you create a community that can become a bridge between different disciplines, be able to think a little bit broader than just singular, educational capacity we provide them? Just think about design, or think about gray infrastructure versus green and nature-based solutions. Where does digital solutions come in? Sort of trying to provide them a different kind of education that sort of enables them to participate in this change, rather than just come in and then gradually figure out, oh, there is this change happening, and then trying to fit into that process. I think that's super important.
So empowering young professionals to be a part of the change, and actually that's the purpose, right? Which is incredibly powerful. Brilliant. Thanks, Newsha. Richard, very quickly, if you could, maybe a couple of comments just on Angela's question of how organizations are ensuring young folks are empowered to learn, lead, and carry on the work in a certain and dynamic future. Can you give us a quick view of what you're doing on that?
So, I mean, this is definitely part of our ESG policy and commitment, right? I mean, we really also want to listen to the young people. I mean, we want to have these people in our company. So we are actually going there. We are working together with an organization in the UK, Tom, called School of My Own, right? We are sharing the infrastructure challenges that we have in water, in energy, and so forth with students there. We're going to universities. We're giving our software for free in partnerships to universities so that they can test this, that they can learn, they can experiment. And then, you know, we have open source software. So it's really shared. I think really have to listen and to learn from each other. It shouldn't be, you know, us and them. We are all together here. And I think that's a big commitment from the company.
Very good. Thank you, Richard. And Will, as you very much kickstarted the session today, perhaps you can give some closing wise words and reflect on that question as well.
Yeah. So I'm an optimist by nature. I am even more optimistic hearing, you know, my friends and colleagues speak about what's possible and not be dismayed by it all. I do believe there's a lot to be done with education and awareness. And I'd say that, you know, water professionals are very invested in that, either through their organizations or personally, in terms of outreach to universities and K through 12 students also, which I see as really critical. I mean, that's making an investment in the long haul around what has to change and awareness. So, you know, the conversation for me was a really nice blend of technology discussion, nature-based solutions, and when I opened up, I really wanted to talk about humanity, you know, and society, and we did that. So I think there's no shortage of levers to be pulled to retrofit the cities we all love, and build better cities. And I think we'll get it done. I believe we'll get it done.
Well said. Thanks, Will. Nice note of optimism to end. So, yeah, thank you to everyone who's tuned in. We've had some really good discussion and questions. Apologies, we haven't got round to all of them, but we'll forward them on to the speakers to try and get back to you individually. This webinar will be available on demand, so we'll make sure the link is broadcast. So if you could share it with your colleagues, that would be much appreciated. And this is the first of a three-part series, sort of in the run-up to Bentley's Year in Infrastructure event taking place in Vancouver in October. So stay tuned for parts 2 and 3, where we'll be diving deeper into some of the challenges as well as the solutions to build cities of the future. Thank you for tuning in, and yeah, look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you. And of course, a big thanks to our speakers. Cannot forget that, Richard, Mark, Newsha, and Will.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.